Hi everyone, it's Amanda. I want to thank you for tuning in and watching my presentation. I did my final project on fan fiction and its impact on literacy education. So I'm going to go through my slides with you and talk a little bit about how it define what fan fiction is, talk about some controversies about it, some advantages and disadvantages, and then finally, like how you can implement it in your classroom if this is something that you are interested in bringing into those environments. So first, I'm going to start by defining what fan fiction is. So fan fiction is widely defined as any fictional piece of literacy that is created for non-profit purposes, and it's based on existing or copyrighted material. So what it usually looks like in practice is somebody will take inspiration from a piece of copyrighted material, usually cartoons. Specifically, there's a whole subsect around Japanese anime. And then they will continue on the story or tweak some things in the story, and we'll talk about more of those details later on. A lot of researchers have called it the current form of a millennia-old version of storytelling. So as we've all learned throughout history, oral storytelling is really important to early civilization. So this is just a more written technological form of that practice. The writing does not follow the strict blueprint of the reference material, so it can be written in a different style. It could take very vast detours, say that the original story was a historical fiction. Somebody could continue to write it and have them jump time and go into space. So it's really whatever the imagination of the writer is where it takes form. They are typically less published than traditional forms of media, and I'll get into this a little bit later, but it is because of the very small sect of people that are interested in it due to the content material. It's largely produced and distributed online on websites that are created and run by fans. It's highly interactive, so somebody will read a story and then they will write one based off of that, or they will take ideas from that person's story and run with it on their own. They'll look for peer input. Peers will share their stories. It's very collaborative. It's a combination of elements from many different media types. So there's audio-visual, there's written materials, there's cartoons, there's hand drawings, there's other art pieces made by it. And so it's then, because of that, it's considered a multimodal experience. And then again, the writing has no limits. Like I said earlier, a historical fiction could turn into space and beyond. So the next thing I want to talk about is the different types of fan fiction, because within the overarching umbrella, there's multiple different pieces of fan fiction. So there's a crossover, which contains characters from different universes that kind of come together. So the example I gave here was like if the gang from Scooby-Doo was to help Wonder Woman save Gotham City. So that's kind of like three different stories combining into this one crossover event. A canon consistent exists in the same realm of possibility as the canon universe. Canon just refers to original story here, with an established event. So the example I gave, and I don't know if everyone's familiar with it because it's not as big of a normal cultural reference, but in the Gilmore Girls, the main character, Lorelai, at one point in the story had the option to marry two different men. So a canon consistent would be if she chose to marry Christopher instead of Luke. So it followed that traditional storyline, but then it just veered the opposite way. A lot of canon consistent stories relate to alternate endings, so fans create what they wanted to see at the end. A canon divergent is similar but a little bit different, so it shows alternative events than the established canon. These events are entirely possible, but they don't follow the more consistent piece that the canon consistent does. So the example I gave here was that in Grey's Anatomy, if they finished up the whole series and had the main character Meredith wake up and realize that the whole 17 or some odd seasons that they have, that it be a hallucination or like a dream due to Alzheimer's disease. So while that is probable, it wasn't already come to that fork in the story originally. So we're going to shift gears a little bit to the controversy in academia about fan fiction. So the first section I have is academic arguments in favor of fan fiction. So fan fiction's production encompasses a wider range of multimedia literacy practices, and not to recognize it would turn the diversity of fan fiction into a stagnant entity. So what that's saying is that this fan fiction encompasses so many different pieces. It's got peer collaboration, it's got writing structure, it's got audio visual, it's got animation, it's got all these wonderful, rich things that students can learn from and learn how to express themselves in different ways. And not to notice the benefits of that would make it just this flat thing that wasn't beneficial to anyone. It's considered a more preferable activity to more the passive activities that some of our adolescents like to do. So we see a lot of teens watching TV or playing video games. TikTok is really big right now in teens. And while they can be listening to stories and things, it's more of a passive activity in terms of academics. But if they're reading and writing these really rich fan fictions, they're actually improving their reading and writing skills within that. And then the last point on here is help students understand how to interact with copious amounts of online media that they will face every day. So as our world is changing, society is becoming very much technological savvy. So our students really need to learn how to interact with all that media that's coming at them every day. So this is one way that they can do that in a way that they like, instead of sitting down and making them do a research paper on some historical figure that they don't really care about. So now I'm going to switch to the arguments against fan fiction. So a lot of academics are concerned about the accuracy and completeness of the academic account. So there hasn't been really a lot of research on this topic because it's emerging as our technology emerges. And as we know, things move very slow in education. So while fan fiction may have been around for the last 15, 20 years, it's really just starting to make its emergence into education. So the academics in the study that I looked at were very skeptical because they said that there just wasn't enough research to support the positivity. So the next one may be considered frivolous or non-academic due to the close resemblance to other recreational media practices. So somebody could look at this and look like they're just surfing the web and reading these random articles, but in reality they're reading these really rich pieces of peer writing. It could cause the students to be technologically, literate, but not more conventionally literate. So they're worried that students will be able to read things on the web and understand things like that, but struggle in person with print media. And it's considered by many academics as derivative and not worth of its full attention, which I'll get into later, but I disagree with that a lot. And then it's unpublishable due to a small specific reader base, but I don't think it really needs to be published for it to have the effect that it needs to on academics. Okay, the next one we're switching gears to. This is the benefits of introducing fan fiction into your literacy education, or introducing your students to fan fiction. It doesn't necessarily need to be a targeted lesson. So the educational benefits are it helps students become emotionally invested in their writing, which we all know is a key to literacy instruction. Linguistic scholars interpreted fan fiction communities as zones of proximal development. So it hits where the students need to be academically, but it also hits their interests. Literacy scholars are considering fan fiction as multimodal spaces, and we read a lot on multimodal learning in the beginning of the semester, so you guys know the importance there. It helps students expand their power, voice, and influence available to a broad range of communities who are differently situated in relations to the dominant instruction and practices of the broadcast era. So that's a lot. So I'll break it down for you guys. It's saying is that the students are able to get their voice out to more people, and they'll be able to share about cultures and understand different parts of the world that they wouldn't have been able to access prior to this technology boom. And then the last one is critical consumption of media and popular culture is really important for ELL students to develop their English skills. So I have read many accounts throughout my life and my schooling that says that English language learners, they've reported that they learned English watching Sesame Street or watching SpongeBob or watching, insert cartoon here. Because they were able to not only learn the language, but learn what like American slang is and things like that. So fan fiction is another way that students can learn those ins and outs of the English language in a safe community. Okay, so in addition to some educational benefits, there's also a lot of social benefits. So I'm going to go into that. They've stated that female adolescents can use fan fiction and collaborative writing to create a safe space to discuss various life perspectives. So as we know, there's a lot of gender biases in society. There's a lot of scary places online for women. There's a lot of scary places in the world for women. So fan fiction can create this small area that young women can go and talk about what's going on in their life and how they're feeling and how they're thinking without the risk of being attacked or shunned or any of the above negative responses. And then it helps young women develop emotional maturity and self-esteem. This goes along with having a safe place to discuss those different things that they might be thinking or experiencing. Gives students an opportunity to engage with media that is meaningful to them. This one's really big because it's really hard to get a student to engage with something that is not meaningful to them. So giving them the option to read and write fan fiction, if that is meaningful to them and that is impactful, then they will be more likely to complete the assignments or the passages or whatever you want them to do. Okay, so I'm going to go into the disadvantages. I'm going to preface this with saying that there's not many. So what does it take away from literacy education? So there's an overwhelming sense of newer literacy implementations never ending. So that's just saying that they're going to keep adding all these new technological advances, saying, oh, this is new media, this is new literacy, this is what needs to be implemented, and there'll never be anything meaningful. And that it's muddying the definition of literacy. The next criticism is that it's limiting critical thinking strategies, which, as you saw in the benefits portion, it actually increases those critical thinking strategies because you really have to think, when you're writing a fan fiction, you have to think about, does this make sense in the universe that I'm talking about? Like if we were in the 1930s and I wrote about somebody having a Tesla, like that wouldn't make sense because it's not historically accurate. You also have to think ahead, like, okay, if my character made this decision, what impacts would it have later? You have to really be creative in how you weave stories together if you're doing one of those crossover events. So it's a really good critical thinking activity. The next concern is that there's future problems with administrators, college admissions, and employers finding the students' material and having the message be appropriate. So we'll talk about this more in implementations, but this is where it's really important to remind your students that their voice when they post on these websites is not private, that this is their public voice. If they wanted to write something that was a little bit more on the inappropriate side or more on that barrier where they weren't sure, then you could tell them to write it privately and not publish it to one of those sites, because once it's on the internet, it's there for everyone. The next criticism is that the content might be misanthropic or sexual. I have seen this a lot in my own instance with fan fiction. A lot of my friends were into it in high school, and there was a lot of sexual comment, a lot of withdrawing from society. I think that this one can be easily navigated because there are a lot of fan fictions out there that don't include those elements. So I think this is on the teacher's side. They have to cherry pick what they introduce their students to and caution them about searching on their own. The next point is that the sexual content would not be appropriate for use in schools. But I just touched base on that about how to navigate that. Second to last one, is the legality problems surrounding the use of copyrighted characters and storylines. So when fan fiction became really popular and people started to implement it in schools, there was a huge concern about how schools and students might be liable because they're using copyrighted material. It has been since found through different laws and different courts that it is not infringent on the copyright because they are not publishing it for money and they are not stealing the characters, they're using it as a basis. A lot of authors are they feel very gracious when their works become a fan fiction because that means that they reach their audience in a very deep way. The last one is integrating fan fiction into the classroom can reduce interest for those who practice the writing out of school. So if you have a student that's already interested in fan fiction and you're trying to get the rest of your class interested in fan fiction, that might make that student not interested in writing fan fiction anymore because they now feel like it's a school assignment instead of something they do for fun. So just kind of feel out, test the waters before you implement it into your classroom. Okay, the next and last section is how to implement writing and reading fan fictions into your classroom. So, how to bring fan fiction in the classroom. You build on students' experience with self-representation in online spaces. So you kind of start off with seeing what your students do online. Are they consumers of media or are they creators of media? And then you go from there, and that's really how you can see if most of your students are consumers instead of creators, then you can have them start reading fan fictions instead of writing them and go from there. You can help engage your students by using pop culture references in the classroom. So it doesn't necessarily need to be, okay, read this fan fiction and write one, but you can pull in different references from different pop culture things at the time to kind of engage your students in any lesson. So fan fiction can help you there. It can help students learn the different purposes for writing. So there's narration, there's informative, there's opinion, there's letter writing, there's journaling. I mean, I can go on and on with all the different types, all the different purposes for writing. But fan fiction really encompasses all of those purposes. So by reading them, they can help them digest what needs to be done to convey what they want when they write anything, not necessarily fan fictions. The next one is that can help appeal to various students' interests. So especially in those crossovers, that's where this is huge. So say you've got a class that, you've got 6 or 7 people that love the DC universe with Batman and Wonder Woman and all those superheroes. But then you've got the other half of the class that's like, oh no, I'm Marvel all the way. You can find crossovers between those two universes and bring the class together, have them read it, and then you can have them debate, how characters would interact with one another, how characters would, do something in a certain scenario. So you really could take one piece of writing and build off of it. Some tips for how to deal with fan fiction in your classroom is that teachers should consider how much access a student has for their age and maturity. Telling a 4th grader to go search fan fictions on their own, probably not a good idea. As we talked about earlier about the sexual content, and they're not mature enough yet to talk with peers online in an appropriate way. So bringing the fan fiction to them and monitoring what they read and watch and do is probably a really good idea. But somebody like a high school senior might be able to, should be able to explore those places on their own, and give them a warning about what they might find and how to navigate away from that. And then another really cool thing you can do with fan fictions is it can help you facilitate discussions on the problems within popular media. So fan fiction really does a really good job about teasing out biases and things like that in popular media. So you can talk about racism, you can talk about gender bias, you can talk about homosexuality, you can talk about poverty. I mean, all these big topics can be teased out using fan fiction and using that copyrighted material. So overall, with all of the research that I read and the advantages and the disadvantages and the controversy and the arguments on both sides, overall, I believe truly that bringing fan fiction into a classroom in one way or another is beneficial. It is still consuming writing, or creating writing. As we grew up, we read books outside of the classroom. I was a huge reader, and a lot of my writing has improved as I've aged because of the books that I've read outside of the classroom, not because of what I've been taught directly in a classroom. And then I also think it will help engage students. It will make them realize that reading and writing isn't this dry, boring activity that we just have to do for school. That it can truly be fun, and we can write and read about what we want to. It also may create lifelong writers that could be our next authors, our next journalists, things like that. So I hope you liked my presentation, and I hope everyone does well getting through the last couple weeks of the semester. Have a wonderful day.